Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we are being joined by Tom Fox, author of The Compliance Handbook. Tom, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. I'm really honored to be on your show.
Well, Tom, we are thrilled to have you here. Are you ready to get started?
I am.
All right. Question number one. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
My advice really to any author, Paul, would be the same for a first time or a 30th time, and that's write. Whatever you do, write. Write every day. If you want to be an author, all you have to do is write. My daughter was 7 when she published her first book, and when I asked her how she did it, she looked at me and said, "Dad, it's easy to publish a book. All you have to do is write it." And she was right when she was 7, and she's right now. The key is just to write every day.
You're a great example of that. We were talking prior to the show. You've actually written and published, is it 17 books? Is that correct?
That's correct.
You got me beaten by 2. I was happy I was at 15, and you've already got me by 2 on there. That's excellent.
I love to write.
Well, and I was going to say, too, a lot of it is just the power of habit, right? It's just writing every day, get into the habit of it, and it's just amazing how much content that you can create as long as you're doing it consistently.
That's absolutely correct. I started out as a blogger, and after blogging for about a year, a colleague emailed me and said, "When's your book coming out?" And I emailed him back, "What book?" He said, "The book about all your blogs." And that was really the start of me recognizing that turning one word into a sentence, into a paragraph, into a blog can lead to a white paper, can lead to a newsletter, can lead to a chapter, and that leads to a book. So it's all a continuum, but the key is to sit down and write.
One nice thing, too, is you can actually repurpose your previous content as well if you want to go in that direction. As you mentioned with your blogs and with some of your emails and some of the other things, it's really easy how you can get this stuff together, add a little polish to it, and boom, you have a book.
Absolutely, or it can be the skeleton and outline that you flesh out later with additional research, which I've done several times as well.
Yeah, you bring up a great point with that. Several of my books were based off of motivational seminars that I do, and that's basically what I did. Took the skeleton, made the outline of the actual presentation, added the core elements, added some storytelling to go with that to share those different journeys, and it was amazing. I know one of my books I actually finished in 24 hours just because the foundation was there, so it was really just filling in the blanks.
That's a great process, Paul.
Well, let's talk about the publishing side. So what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
Well, I guess the hardest part about getting published is there's not a hard part. I am a big believer in self-publishing. I write in a fairly niche area, so I'm not looking to sell to the wider public. And I'm able to control my output, my costs, and whatever I want to publish through self-publishing. I published 2 of my books with publishers. Both experiences were negative. I used publishers because I thought I needed the cachet of having a publisher, and that was absolutely incorrect. If you are willing to invest the time to learn how to upload into Amazon, it used to be called CreateSpace, but it's as simple as uploading your fully typed out manuscript and having them approve it, you're ready to self-publish. So my experience around self-publishing has been uniformly positive, and that's the route I take now.
Now, you mentioned that you did have 2 books with publishers, and both experiences weren't that great. So what were some of the issues that you had?
Well, the first publisher managed to go bankrupt about 30 days after I published my book with them. So that was sort of the end of that. And then it was a lot of difficulty getting the rights back to the manuscript for additional copies to be sent out. And then the second publisher, the what I thought was when I submitted my final manuscript, they emailed me and they said, well, we've decided we can't publish this, and so we're sending it back. You can self-publish it. So a lot of work with editors and others at the company was all for naught, and I ended up having to self-publish it.
Got it. Well, and I think the nice thing too is when you do it yourself as well, you have the freedom. You can publish it whenever you want, because all you're doing at the end of the day is you're uploading the files, right? You're putting that live out there. You don't have to go through anyone, and you keep full control. And I think that's one of the biggest things is you want to have control of the process, because I'm a control freak. I will be the first to admit it, and I don't want to give control of my book to someone else unless I know that I have the final say.
Well, and to use cross-cultural references, final cut means final cut. And if you don't have final cut, you don't have control. And if you don't have the control that you just articulated, you don't have control of your own product.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launches, and you've done a few of them now, so that have worked well.
So, Paul, I've tried a variety of strategies. I've tried a soft launch where I really didn't publicize the book too much. I've tried a much more heavily publicized launch where I put it out through the channels available in my niche area of practice. And the thing that I found the most successful, though, is to talk about the book long before you publish it. So whether that's talking about it in terms of calling up people asking for advice or research, asking people to read your manuscript, that creates sort of an organic buzz that, frankly, I've found is the most helpful. And when you're ready to launch on day one, you've laid the groundwork for, if you haven't done pre-sales, which I typically have not done in the past, you have a large number of first and second day sales, which dramatically impacts where you end up on the Amazon's list. So the Compliance Handbook, when it came out, was number one in business ethics for the first 2 weeks because I pushed very hard for lots of sales immediately upon launch, and that seemed to be the most successful.
And who were you pitching this to? Did you already have a list? Were these different contacts, clients? Who were the people that you were reaching out to?
So I practice in the area of compliance and business ethics. I blog every day. I podcast in that area. So it's to that social media audience. I premiered it at a major compliance conference, who graciously allowed me to have a book signing and really get the word out at the conference itself. But I've done a lot of laying the groundwork. In my next book, I'm going to actually do a podcast series leading up to the book's premiere, where I talk about a chapter of the book for each podcast and see if I can really drive more enthusiasm for the book in that venue as well.
Well, it sounds like, too, so with your process, with you doing your blog every day and your podcast every day, so basically, as you have been writing the book, you were talking about that journey, right? So it's like, hey, I've been working on this chapter, or this is the subject that we were talking about today. Is it kind of like that?
That's certainly one way to do it. In the Compliance Handbook, actually podcasting was a part of the editing process for me because I would write a draft, then I would read that draft, which became a daily podcast. It was a 365 Days to a Better Compliance program, basically. And as I read the podcast, I had a red pen out, and I was doing editing for the book. So I had a podcast, and I had an edited page, which at the end of the month I could collect into a chapter and send that to the publisher for them to start their editing process.
I love that you mentioned that. That's one of the tactics that I utilize with my own books. The only thing different is it's when I'm doing the audiobook version. So I'm utilizing that as a way to do a final proofread of the book. And it's just amazing the things you catch just by reading that out loud.
You're absolutely correct.
Well, speaking of books, I'd like to know what is your favorite book and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
So my favorite book was by a fellow Southerner, Willie Morris. Willie Morris was a Mississippian who moved north into New York City and was an editor at Harper's Magazine. And he wrote a book about growing up in the South and moving up to New York and hear his experiences of why he found a home in the North. And I happened to read it as part of my life when I went to graduate school and law school up north. And I was there in Michigan at the time I read it, and it really resonated with me, and it always has since then.
And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
So I would have to say it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. I find that to be the greatest opening line, if not sentence, ever written, because it perfectly encapsulates the entire story of A Tale of Two Cities. And you can say that anywhere. People automatically and immediately recognize it, and you have a conversation piece around fellow lovers of fiction, fellow lovers of history, and fellow lovers of books. So for me, that's the perfect sentence, and it's the perfect line, opening line, and perhaps even the most perfect line in a book I've ever read.
It definitely gets your attention. The minute you said that, too, I was cracking up. I was like, oh, man, straight to the book. I love it. Well, Tom, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
Sure. So I blog every day at the FCPA Compliance Report. That's www.fcpacompliancereport.com. I have the only podcast network in compliance, appropriately named the Compliance Podcast Network, which is found at www.compliancepodcastnetwork.net. And I'm always reachable via email at tfox@tfoxlaw.com.
Tom, thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.